welcome to our discussion tonight. The men from the St. Paul's Wesleyan Holiness Church have organized a very important and meaningful and timely discussion, something that we would want to engage the community on. Tonight we are talking about the whole idea of the COVID-19 and how can men deal with it, how have men been dealing with it, and how best to bounce back. Before we delve into the discussion, however, I would now invite our pastor, Pastor Huggins, to invoke God's blessings. Pastor, let's stand please for prayer.
Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we bow our hearts, our minds, our heads humbly before you. At this time, Lord God, acknowledging you as our faithful, loving God. Father, we thank you for this day. Lord, we give you thanks for this time of meeting. We indeed invite you, Lord God, to be with us, and we ask, God, that you would guide and you would lead this evening's discussion. We ask, Father, that you would bless each presenter. We ask, God, that you would give them clarity of thought and speech, and that the session would be productive, it would be engaging, and that persons would learn and persons would have much food for thought leaving these doors this evening. We pray, Lord God, for those who are on their way, and that, Father, the men would have a good time together, and that you would be pleased with all that will be said and done. We give you all the praise and we give you all the glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Pastor. I want to begin with the sobering words of Frederick Nietzsche, and he says, and I quote, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger," end of quote. I want to further insist that as a result of us being here today, we are stronger than we were yesterday, because the challenges we face did not kill us. Evidently, we know that we are living in unprecedented times. We are living in perilously difficult times because of the COVID. And a culture of uncertainty has enveloped us. And we are being called upon as men to rethink and to retool as we map the way forward. Tonight, our topic, and before we delve into the topic, I'll introduce the individuals. The topic for tonight is the impact of COVID-19 on men in the community and how to bounce back. I am Darrell Lloyd, and I am the Vice President of the Men's Association. Tonight we have with us three distinguished gentlemen, and I'm particularly pleased because they are all from the St. Paul's community. They are not Wesleyan Holiness men, but we are glad that, of course, they would have consented to engage us in tonight's discussion. I have Dr. Jensen Morton, the District Medical Officer for the area challengers to Sandy Point. He's also an on-called doctor for Poxon Hospital in Sandy Point, and he operates an office in his own community, St. Paul's. Mr. Meshach Alford, a very young and hard-working gentleman. He's an entrepreneur, he's an environmental consultant, and a farmer by profession. And we have Mr. Naren Maynard. I believe he's a good basketballer, yes, basketballer, and he's also the Senior Child Protection Officer. Gentlemen, again, we are glad that you have, of course, agreed. Oh, okay. I'm glad that you have all agreed to speak to the men and speak to the nation, really, on the whole idea of COVID-19, how it has affected men, and how best we can bounce back. I want to, of course, thank those gentlemen who are in the audience, and tonight's discussion what we are going to do really, we'll allow the gentlemen to open with an opening statement, And then we are going to more have like a chit chat, and if anybody wishes to ask a question or two, of course, we would want you to do so, because that is how we would want the discussion to go tonight. And so we are going to begin with the distinguished doctor, Dr. Jensen Morton. Dr. Morton.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So because it's going to be 3 persons presenting, I'm going to more so stick to my field or my area, speak about it's a pandemic, so of course the main impacts are going to be health-based. So I'm going to stick to the information with regards to some of the health-based impacts on the community and what can be done to lessen some of the impacts or cope with some of the impacts as best as possible.
Okay, Jensen would have given us an indication as to what he's going to be speaking about. And so we are going to move now to Mr. Maynard.
Good night to everyone. First of all, let me big up or salute the Wesleyan Men's Society for having such an activity like this. I believe men's voice, men's concern ought to be heard, and we as a community, as a society, need to create that avenue where men can speak freely and openly and express their views without being discriminated in any form or feel less than who they are. I'm here basically to speak as it relates to the effect of COVID-19 on men, as it relates to them supporting their families, and the impact it has in terms of them paying child maintenance and stuff like of that sort. There are men who lost their jobs and are not able to provide for their families. And we know as men this can affect their ego a lot. I know of instances where men also, who were the breadwinners, are now dependent on their spouses to support their families. So I can share much more information on that when the time comes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Morton. And of course, that is a discussion that we would want. Mr. Maynard, that is a discussion, of course, that we would want to continue. Because, I mean, in these trying times, you have so rightly said that many of our men who were, most of them were the breadwinners for the home, and a few of them would have lost their jobs. And we, of course, understand the psychosocial effect and all of the different challenges that it has created for the home. And so we are glad that you're going to speak to that issue. Mr. Alford, at this time, will give his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to disagree a bit because I was reminded some 2 months ago or so that I am still on the roster for the Wesleyan Holiness Church. And so I consider myself a Wesleyan. In fact, I remember one of the most potent of experiences I've had is right here in this room. This is where we kept Men's Sunday, Men's Fellowship. It was persons like myself, James Ward, Kito, the late Donnie, and a couple others who are now overseas and so on. We sang a song, we practiced a song for Men's Society, Men's Service one time, and it read, just a few good men. And when I look around the room today, I say we are few in numbers, but we are good men, all right? And so I wanted to just read a quick stanza or whatever you call it from a verse from that song. You say, what a dying world could use is a willing man of God, who dares to go against the grain and work without applause. A man who will raise the shield of faith, protecting what is pure, whose love is tough and gentle, a man whose word is sure. He doesn't need authorities to reason him away. He doesn't need an army to guarantee a win. He just needs a few good men. Tonight, I'll be discussing more along the lines of food and nutrition security, as indicated by the statement made by the moderator. I'm a farmer, not just by profession, but by passion as well. And I believe that we are all aware of the before. But the conditions brought by COVID-19 has further exacerbated those things. And I would like to touch on that as it pertains to man's image of himself and how that works in this day and time, and how can we bounce back to some extent. That is my contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Alford. Of course, I'm happy to know that you are a Wesleyan, and I think the pastor has taken note, and so I know she has begun visiting members, those who have been a bit delinquent, and so I could tell you that you're going to definitely get a visit. So, gentlemen, of course, we have for you three distinguished men who will expound on meaningful topics that are very important to us as we weather the storm during this trying and difficult times, the COVID-19. And so we are going to allow them now to speak. And as they speak, if you wish to ask a question, as I would have indicated, feel free to do so. Mr. Morton, who is a doctor by profession, will speak, as he would have indicated, from the health perspective. It is important for us as men to ensure that our health remains intact. It is important for us as men to make sure that we keep a healthy body, because the COVID, which is relatively new, it is new. It is something that has never come this side. And so it is important for us to maintain a healthy body if we are going to ensure that at least we are able to overcome the COVID-19. So Dr. Morton, I'll now allow you to expound a little bit. Thank you again.
Okay, good night. So I would begin by ensuring that we have all of the bases covered with regards to having a good understanding as to exactly what we are facing here. This global pandemic, it was declared a pandemic in very early 2020. It first emerged in November 20, it was first noticed and identified in November 2019. And it has since spared no country. I think there's only one country on earth that doesn't have any cases yet, a small Pacific country that shut off all contact for now. But everywhere else, every single other country on earth has been impacted. Now, St. Kitts and Nevis is no exception, and the St. Paul's community is no exception. There were outbreaks in the community, little small clusters of outbreaks, sometimes individual households or small neighborhoods in the past. Of the 25 persons that have been pronounced deceased from COVID-19, to my knowledge, 3 of them were from this area, to my knowledge. Now there are a few things to note. They're not hearing? Oh. Okay. So there are a few things to note with regards to COVID-19. And it is for you to understand that even though if you watch a lot of television and listen to a lot of persons, it's going to make everyone really frightened, it's important to know the main risk factors. So as a male, you're not specifically at any greater risk than a female, but the 3 things that we've noticed that are linked to a worse outcome are persons who are over the age of 70, but older persons in general, persons that suffer from particular comorbidities, especially uncontrolled diabetes, amongst others. And the third one is persons that are obese. So those 3 groups of people, the older people, sicklier people, and the overweight people, those are the people whom, when they get a COVID-19 infection, they tend to have a worse outcome. In the St. Kitts setting, we have not seen any young, active, healthy person contract COVID-19 and end up passing away, and few of them have had bad outcomes which required hospitalization or serious medical care. Now, the impacts of COVID-19 are multiple. Apart from the obvious impact, which is the death that it may cause and the otherwise disability and damage to individuals that it may cause from actually contracting it. The stress caused by COVID-19 also has some significant impacts. So the first one would be the stress from constant worrying and the knowledge that we're in a pandemic. When you have these background levels of stress, it tends to, ironically, it causes an underlying dampening of the entire immune system, which is the irony of it. If you worry about it, then the things to help you fight it off actually work a little bit worse. It's based on the hormones that are released when you're a little bit more frightened. You don't have to be super frightened all the time, but if you're anxious about it all the time, it has that bad side effect. So what we've been seeing is, especially earlier, it's kind of calmed down now, but in the earlier part when people were kind of afraid and they weren't too sure about what COVID-19 was, you listen to the news, you're just seeing people dying on the road and stuff like that. It scared so many people that many people really used to come to the hospital seeking medical care, freaking out. And sometimes their anxiety was a greater threat to them overall than any other actual symptom from a disease which they had. So we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful, ensure that we arm ourselves with the knowledge. When you have the knowledge, you'll know not to panic too much, and you'll know also what you can do to keep yourself as safe as possible. Now, apart from the stress which is caused by just knowing that there's a pandemic around, the other stress that has to be mentioned is the stress secondary to employment, or rather lack of employment, and also the lack of movement. You have to understand that because of how COVID-19 is spread, two big things happened. Lots of professions which once were ridiculously stable, which once provided for thousands of families, and which once brought in a nice, solid income. A lot of those professions have seen themselves put on pause, and the immediate future of them we still cannot dictate at this time. Those persons, especially those that might be working in tourism or other aspects of the service industry, even up to this point in time, things have not come close to what they were in pre-pandemic levels. I think what was really happening was that St. Kitts was actually a lot more prosperous than people were giving it credit for, and it was only when this happened and it got cut off that people realized the significance of it. A lot of people, they invested very heavily into their businesses and into their chosen professions, and they've just been put on pause, and their means of supporting themselves and their families, it's been disrupted. The stress caused by that, it will or it does have an underlying negative health effect. And that underlying negative health effect, that can cause impacts to people even if you don't contract the COVID-19 itself, or even if you contract it and you barely get anything bad happen to you from COVID-19 itself. So the ailments that we have to be very careful of would be the hypertension and the diabetes and some of the other chronic ailments. Those are directly linked. Those are chronic ailments that are directly linked to stress levels and other aspects of lifestyle. So we have to bear other things in mind in terms of when you have your source of income disrupted, certain ways in which you live your life also become disrupted, and certain behaviors which you may have been participating in previously, which were healthier, you may see them get changed. So one of the things would be you may have to cut costs with regards to some of the things that you might be eating, or if you had a particular diet, you might not be able to afford the particular diet that you had before. Something else is that if you are someone who does not have a nice, secure source of income, then if something happens to you such that you know something has happened, something's changed. You feel, maybe you might feel like a little bump somewhere. Maybe you realize that there's a rash that's not going away. Maybe you realize that you're getting a headache and it's kind of worsening and some other things. You may be reluctant to get them checked out because you may be thinking of the cost and the cost alone and afraid of incurring such a cost. Sometimes even if you're able to get something diagnosed and there's a treatment, you might have to delay the treatment because there's a cost involved and you're not working. So these are ways in which a pandemic can have some negative health effects. Now, despite all of this, there are things that can be done. So one of the main things is the fact that the government's community health service, it still exists. We have 12 health centers all over the island. There's a health center right in St. Paul's. There's a health center next door in Sandy Point. These health centers, they have their particular days. If you're not feeling well, you can always get checked out there. And that is one way in which you could cut down cost. The government pharmacies also exist, especially for older persons who are the ones more vulnerable to COVID-19. Don't forget the government pharmacy is always there. We provide a good chunk of the medications that people use on a regular basis to the best of our ability. And that is something, again, that can assist you with cost. When we had a restriction on movements, that was a bit difficult because a very good thing to do at this point in time, since COVID-19 adversely affects obese people, would have been to encourage persons to do more walking and exercise. Luckily, the absolute lockdown days have passed, so I would encourage everyone, every morning, get out there, get active, use the pandemic as the time to get that aspect of your health in order. Walking is free, doesn't cost you anything, and it's something that you can do to start your day to ensure that the rest of your day you have a higher energy level and you're in higher spirits. Exercising early in the morning, it boosts testosterone levels and it helps with management of some of those same hormones associated with stress. And the final thing is that even though I've heard some people, which is why I mentioned it, I've heard some people complain about alterations to the diet. The truth is that the cheapest foods that are available are the healthiest ones. They're the locally grown ones, the ones grown in the, I would say, best conditions, like less preservatives, less dangerous additives, fertilizers and pesticides, those kinds of stuff. It's not as bad, I would say, as those, or rather, we are not sure what's in those things that are imported, as opposed to those that we grow locally. We're not going to poison ourselves, put it that way. So those foods, they're cheaper and they're healthier for you. They take a little bit more in terms of preparation and those things, but as long as you're willing to get accustomed to that new aspect of that new type of lifestyle, it should be okay. So with COVID-19, the other thing that I would encourage is if you are one of the persons in the vulnerable groups, I would encourage you to do everything possible to protect yourself, including trying your hardest to get checked out to make sure that everything's okay, and if that's the case, to get vaccinated against COVID-19. So I would say check with your health provider, make sure everything is okay if you're not vaccinated yet, if you're an older person, if you are someone with significant comorbidities, or if you're someone who is obese and concerned, get it checked out. If everything's okay, then I would encourage that. For other groups of people, if you wish to get vaccinated, I would also say so. The path that has been taken has been one to be a lot more forceful with the vaccination to try to get particular rates. But I'm still someone that believes that it is something that should still be done with a combination of volunteering as well as being well informed and as well as having all of your fears and concerns addressed. And if all of those things together are there, then I would say yes. Now, the other thing would be to ensure that if you suffer from these chronic illnesses, that you get them checked out, and managed. Even if you are vaccinated against COVID-19, the vaccination is not a bulletproof shield. It's something that assists you in the event that you contract COVID-19. The virus is spreading so much that, in my opinion, very soon it's going to become endemic, meaning that it's everywhere, and running from it, it's not going to be possible. It's going to be like the flu. We don't bend over backwards and run from the flu and shut down everything from the flu. If it's there, it's present. You learn to basically live with it. If someone's infected, you keep your distance, keep your space. If you're not infected, you go about your business. Now, the persons that are vulnerable have to take extra precaution to protect themselves, but COVID-19 has not really been drastically affecting younger people. So younger people are the ones who are, I would say, I wouldn't really force it upon them, but since it's possible for them to spread it to other persons and not know it, I think that's why they, in the beginning, and they still are, going along the path of forcing vaccination. But I really think that soon, when it becomes endemic, it just means that anybody can get it. Bearing that in mind, you have to make sure that if you have a chronic illness, that your chronic illness is addressed. Like I said, the COVID-19 vaccine is not a bulletproof shield. Even with it, if you have badly controlled diabetes, badly controlled hypertension, etc., you can still contract COVID-19 and you can still have a bad outcome. So you have to make sure you get checked for these ailments, and if you have them, you have to make sure that you adjust accordingly. You take the medication when you should, you get the blood test when you should, you check with your health providers when you should, and you otherwise lead a lifestyle that's in accordance with the illness that you have. So you don't eat anything that you're not supposed to eat, which they will inform you in the health facility, what to eat, what not to eat, quantities, types, etc. You try your hardest to stick to that. Also, maintaining yourself with regards to the exercise, getting vaccinated if you know you're vulnerable, avoiding crowds, avoiding anything which would unnecessarily put you at risk. And that really would be the best formula for you to get out of the COVID-19 pandemic as unscathed as possible. With regards to the stress part, like I said, if you have yourself well informed and you realize that there's nothing to really be that afraid of, and you do everything in your power to make sure that you yourself have the best chance of surviving and having a good outcome, then there really isn't anything to overly stress yourself on. So those are just some things I thought I would share. I'm hoping that the community can, if it's one thing that the community can do, they can try to come together with social distancing, but try to come together with regards to ensuring that everyone is exercising, check up on persons as much as you can, encourage persons, if they're in one of the vulnerable groups which I mentioned especially, encourage those persons to get checked, and if they are okay for them to get vaccinated, encourage persons who are accustomed to a particular type of lifestyle to try to ease upon it a bit and try to reduce their risk until we can get a little bit more information and a little bit more control. And just basically the community be each other's keepers, and I think that's our best shot at having a good outcome in this COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you so very much, Doctor. Doctor would have, of course, touched on quite a number of things as it relates to the health aspect of COVID. And I am particularly pleased that he has reminded us that it is important for us to take very, very good care of our health. Because, as I would have indicated to us, that this pandemic is going to be around for a very, very long time. It has a number of side effects. And so it is important for us as men, to make sure that our health is intact. So whenever we are hit with this pandemic, at least once we have a healthy body, at least we'll be able to some extent, who knows, fight off this COVID. He would have made mention of the persons who are at high risk, those who are older, the 70 years and older, those who have uncontrolled illnesses like the diabetes and the high blood pressure, and those who are obese. And he would have stressed the importance of exercising. Exercising is critically important. He also spoke to the stress level as it relates to COVID. Because of the mobility, people cannot move around. Sometimes it creates a lot of problems and tension in the home. And I'm sure that Mr. Maynard is going to speak on the high level of domestic violence that we would have heard of that were happening in some of our homes. And also he spoke of the increase in unemployment among our men. Dr. Morton, of course, we want to thank you, and he would have at least reminded us of the importance once we would have checked our health, our doctor, and we feel that we are fit and ready. It is important for us to try as much as possible to think seriously about vaccination. But critically important, it is for us to educate ourselves and meet with your health practitioner so that at least once you get into this, you know what you are doing. Thank you again, doctor. We are now going to hear from Mr. Maynard. Mr. Maynard. Okay. Maynard, both of us will share this and then you will.
Yeah, good night again to everyone. Hope I'm speaking loud enough for our brothers and sisters in Nevis to hear. But I'm going to cut straight to the point. I'm going to be very brief and straight to the point. Ego, E-G-O. As men, we have big egos. No fault of us specifically. It may be because of the way how we were raised or the way how we were socialized growing up. But we tend to have big egos. And there are times that we need to put those egos aside. And I'm sure COVID has taught us that there are times we need to put our egos aside. Let me use one or two examples. When it comes to child maintenance, there are some men who feel good about themselves when they are providing financially for their families. For whatever reason, it is their contribution to their family, it is their contribution to society. When you mess with that, when that financial process is messed with, it can damage men. And when I say damage them, it can damage them mentally. Not being able to provide for their family. Now, child support, yes. Let me use this example. Let's say a man was summoned for child support and he was ordered by the court to pay, let's say, $150 a week for a child, okay? COVID come, he lost his job, okay? So he's not able to provide that $150 that he used to before. Because of men egos, we tend not to want to do anything about it or afraid to do anything. So instead of going before the court and ask for maybe a decrease in the payment or to have the order suspended until you can find other means of producing that $150 for maintenance, we tend to not do anything at all. And then we go into a slum, which affects us mentally, physically, health-wise as well. And it's okay for us to seek help as men. It's okay for us to seek help as men. As I would have mentioned earlier, we need to have a lot more of these men talks to talk about family issues in the home, how it affects some of our men. Men ought to be the spiritual leaders in our home. Men ought to be the mentally fit to support our children. It's not just about their finances. A man has to be mentally fit to take care of his family. If a man is broken mentally, it affects every aspect of his life. His spiritual life is affected, his mental life is affected. His social life, his emotional life, everything of that nature is affected. Okay? It's important for us as men to stay healthy in our society because our children still need us even though we are not able to provide for them financially because we lost our job. I think there's a saying that goes, your presence is more important than your present. Being there is more important than providing your children with gifts and material stuff. And so I specifically want to highlight that. COVID-19 has affected all of us in various ways, okay? I can only share my experience and my field of work. And it would be good for me to hear from some of the few men that are here. Maybe you can share some of your personal experience. And as men, we can talk about it, give each other suggestions back and forth in order to help each other. Because I think for us to overcome this, we have to support each other. I know we've been saying this for years, or people used to do it back in the days, and to some extent we have lost that, but we need to get back to that. We really need to get back to that where I am my brother's keeper. If he's down, I'm able to support him. I'm still working, so I can still chip in, maybe help him out with the $75 to pay for his child maintenance, stuff like that. But for whatever reason, we have gone away from that, and we don't have that family ties that we once have. I don't know what it will take for us to get back there, but we need to support each other. Men need support. I'm sure all of the men here and the one lady in the back can attest to that. We talk about rebounding. How do we rebound from this? I mentioned support, the family support, supporting each other in the community. As men, we know that it's our financial responsibility to support. So if you lost a job, we need to explore other options. If you used to work in the tourism industry, maybe you have another inner skill that you were not aware of, and COVID-19 may help generate that skill. Maybe you need to be a baker, maybe you need to do something else. But I think that is one of the things COVID has taught us, to be more creative as a people, come up with new ideas, strategize. So even though COVID comes with a lot of negative stuff, I think he has brought out some good stuff as well. And I want to encourage us as men not to give in, not to break, because communities need men. If we don't have men, a community would not sustain if we don't have men. We are important. Don't feel marginalized. Don't feel less important. We need men. Mishak said, a few good men, and we need men, especially in St. Paul's. I want to end on that note, but I also want to ask the doctor a question as it pertains to substance abuse, drugs, and alcohol. I don't know if you can share some insight as it relates to that, because I know these small communities around here, I still don't see it practiced despite COVID, where men gather and they drink excessively and stuff like that. So I don't know if you want to share some information as it regards to that and it affects, if COVID, the relation with substance abuse and COVID.
Maybe what we are going to do, when we allow the opportunity for questions, of course we want to thank Mr. Maynard. Mr. Maynard would have stressed the importance of men checking your ego. Men's ego becomes threatened when the role that they play in the home is affected. You know, pride is important, that's one. And I think he said men should not only be the financial head of the home, but also men should be seen as the spiritual leaders in the home. And two aspects of rebounding that he would have emphasized and emphasized quite well is the need for family ties. Because what we are going through, nobody knows when it will be his or her turn. And so it is important to have a strong family connection so that when difficult and challenging and trying time come, at least we would have a strong family network, something, someone that we can always lean to. And he emphasized over and over again that there is a need for men to be supported. Men need support. Thank you so very much, Mr. Maynard. We are now going to hear from the environmentalist, Mr. Alford.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I believe that the discussion so far tonight has largely dovetailed into each other. It's amazing that we have prepared our separate notes, but how much they overlap, but not too far. And so I want to start off by putting things into context. You know, in late primary school and then into early high school is when we started hearing a lot about the concept of globalization. And for us, it was just something to do a test on, you pass it and you move on. And over the years, I don't think it has become more real until we see the onset of new technology and communication, and things move around, but those were in more of a positive form. But then you look at COVID-19 and the pandemic and you see the real downside to a pandemic. And you see that we often hear that if America sneezes, you know, the Caribbean and so on catches a cold. Well, Wuhan did, China, and the whole world is now affected. The reason why I start there is because Naren just spoke about a whole concept of man's ego. And in my deliberation with self about what do I say concerning COVID-19 and in this context. And it all came down to an image of self-image. How do you see yourself? And Naren, in a way, explained for us that man has a big ego, but man also has a sense that he needs to provide. A big sense of part of masculinity is that competitiveness and his ability to be in control and all these things. Now, when you give considerations to these things, you have to consider if really, given the current climate, he can truly be these things. And so I wanted to look at that as I go into my material concerning the pandemic and its impact on men. To think about whether you can carry on in that same definition or you must redefine and push going forward. The pandemic that we are faced with is not the first one. We're all aware of that. Of course, we heard about the Spanish flu. You heard about the Zika virus. You heard about the polio, HIV, AIDS. All these things have had serious impacts on our lives today. What is different about those is that travel and so on, especially for the Spanish flu, that killed about 50 million persons, right? The travel and the extent of movement was not so great. And so you're seeing the real effects now with a global pandemic such as COVID-19. There's a study coming out of Ireland. And it was interesting because it was looking at men and their behavior concerning this. And the question was asked between men and women, basically, when do they think the pandemic will be over, the conditions? And most men project that it takes about 6 months and it will be over with. That is far different from what women think, right? Women think you have a couple of years to go. And I started wondering whether this is because we are thinking about what we can do now given our current circumstance, if we are working or we are affected, how much we can provide for. Do we have another 6 months to provide? Or is it a hopeful kind of thing, right? That we this can't pass 6 months, otherwise we're in problems, right? Or, no, naturally, we're not, we believe we can take control, we have power, and so on. And so I wanted to also consider that in our thinking. Remember, COVID-19 has brought a number of conditions. All governments I guess with the exception of the island that Dr. Jensen spoke of, would have instituted, well, they did, instituted lockdowns, travel bans, and quarantines, state of emergencies. All these things have negative consequences. The COVID-19 has consequences beyond health. It has economic, social, and political consequences in countries all over the world. And so the crux of my presentation is looking at the worst blow. I wanted to read something from the World Bank. The pandemic disturbs the whole food system, from the primary supply to the final demand. Disturbances in food supply chains and shocks in food production, as well as a decline in incomes and remittances, have created tensions and food insecurity in the world over. So when we think about that 6 months people are talking about, the disruptions that have been that are already in play, it won't take 6 months. It will take way more than that. And that is why we have to begin to condition our mind. All right? And so tonight I also want to talk about that same point of self-reliance. As individuals, as a community, as a country, is that even possible? And that's something that I would like to also try to explore. The supply and demand, food. Talking about food security now. Remember, when you're talking about security, is how much control you have over your food and by extension, your nutrition. We are experiencing some serious problem in the agro-food food chain system. Major disruptions. And I will point to some examples later on. We are seeing that because of these same disruptions instigated by the panic to buy food because of the perceived scarcity, we have seen scarcity in our supermarkets, but in the world over, they have experienced it even more drastic. These interruptions have come as a result of producers all over the world have run short of labor force because of these same lockdowns, and people are also being infected. And so we are now at the point where we are going to be experiencing serious backlogs. Some of the commentators and some of the experts have pointed to the simple fact that what we are getting now is a lot of what was already in the food supply chain. All right? And so the real consequences as it relates to food shortage has not really come yet. All right? And so that again is something that I believe will kind of check man's perception of themselves in terms of their own ability to provide. And I'm talking about providing here in terms of food and nutrition, right? Providing for your family, all right? When we look at the demand side of things, these parts, we have less, we call it disposable income. Our savings are not that much. It has its limits. And so on the demand side, when you're not working, what can you really buy? And so that implication is also being felt from the farmer's end, right? Because the buying, the purchasing power has significantly reduced with time of the people in your space. That has effects on the farmer to continue to produce, all right? I have witnessed, and we all have witnessed, in St. Kitts and Nevis recently, as a former planner, physical planner, senior planner in the government, vending situation in Bastia was one of my strongest arguments. I've made arguments for them to be there on the street. But I'm not going to get into that. But the decision to remove them in the way that it was done had implications even for farmers, because that was their market. Because farmers have a relationship with vendors. Vendors are on the most pedestrianized areas of the street, so they get a sparse turnover. And so when we remove that market, because we already closed the borders, we're not getting anything out to Anguillar and to St. Martin and to Statia. These are the persons we are focusing on. And you can't compete with the likes of Best Buy. In my experience as a farmer myself, they don't take certain things from local farmers, especially watermelons and so on. So your market is already limited. So when you remove these persons from the high trafficked areas in this time, you find farmers are having produce spoiling on their hands. Remember, farmers don't have most farmers won't have storage. Again, we're talking about having some control over food security for ourselves. And so that was something that really sparked at me, because I said that this is something that required more discussion. The policies that we institute has to be proper first. But if you're going to remove persons, you have to give them the courtesy of a notice, like an early warning system, right? That you're coming so you can start taking steps and measures. We also look at the fact that food imports, as I indicated before, our families are affected abroad as well in terms of remittances. Our demand has not really changed, right? So the question is, if we are having issues at the local level in producing food and having enough to sustain our own, and they're having troubles out there to send, what are we going to do as individuals, as men in these communities, in terms of beginning to safeguard at home first and further feeling into the community? As I indicated earlier, the purchasing power of persons and of countries is fast depleting, and investments made by farmers is fast declining. And so that is showing you that production is about to drop if it has not already started dropping, right? The stay-at-home orders has increased demand for food. See all the panic shopping that went on because you announced that we have cases, and immediately all of the supermarkets were flooded and so on. That took food off the shelf, but the lockdown themselves put people in a state of just eating, just taking stuff, and so increased demand. And what we don't have is that kind of storage mechanism to supply that. And if the supply chain is slowing down, right, and stopping and has ceased in some areas, and that has serious implications for people like us who live in what we call the developing world, because we are more on the demand side, and we have vulnerable communities, the rural parts in particular, who won't have access to certain things. Again, we're talking about food insecurity and nutrition at the same time. Imports. I want to talk about imports and exports. Some countries around the world, including China, as big as China's economy is having problems in terms of importing soybean. And we know that soybean is almost like a universal food, can be processed into many things for consumption. What they are facing right now is price gouging. The price for soy on the market has skyrocketed as a result. So if we are again on the demand side, you're receiving, when we do buy products, especially when there's been value added, think about the cost that we are having. Think about what Dr. Morton just said, and Naren spoke about declining monies in our pockets due to a fall in our tourism sector here in St. Kitts. I think at some point tourism and travel was around 62 or 64% of the economy. We are seeing now a decline in according to the ECCB annual report and study released this year for last year, a reduction in the value added for restaurants and hotels by some 74%. Of course, we know that. We don't really have no activity going on in those areas. But we have seen a contraction in the economy of some 10.7%. So we are talking about what disposable income you really have to buy or to purchase things that when the prices will be going up significantly. So this is how you just begin to see the effects that is to come. On the more export side, there are countries, for the sake of their own, have decided to place a ban on exporting. You're talking about countries like Russia, who have decided to put a ban on cereals. You're talking about places like Cambodia, who have put a ban on rice. Again, these are things that we see in our day-to-day meals or weekly meals. And so, again, some of the very staple items that we are accustomed to, right, may not be available because of this pandemic. Again, I said, and I will repeat, so the effects of COVID-19 on the supply chain, it has affected production on the other end. It has shut down plants, production plants, it has shut down warehouses, it has affected the entire logistics behind the movement of food and other supplies and other goods that are to come. I will go on to the impact on agriculture, because I've not really talked about agriculture, even locally. In a large way, I work with a prop, an egg. As I said, I'm a farmer, I'm a poultry farmer, and I'm going to speak to the egg in a bit. The farming sector is one of the most vulnerable of sectors. In St. Kitts and Nevis, the economy, it holds about 4% that I'm seeing. I know a couple months ago I read something less, so I'm going with a more optimistic figure of 4% of our GDP and economy, all right? And so, when you, of the GDP economy, right? And so, if farming is truly the backbone of this economy, then farming is a very small backbone. And I wonder what kind of weight can it really lift, all right? And so, we have to begin to think about exactly where our investments are going. I remember when I worked for Kitchen Hill, I taught there, well, I was a sustainability manager, but I used to have to teach a course every time there are new workers coming in on sustainability. And I always remember when we were looking at tourism and the benefits to the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis, I remember this report that says 60 to 80 cents of every dollar spent in the tourism sector was leaving the country, right, of the Caribbean, St. Kitts included, and Latin America. So you think about your priority and so on, and the food. The former Minister of Tourism, when I was interviewing him for my thesis some years ago, he would have indicated that we have tourists coming in a plane and they land at our airport. The image it got to me, they land and our food is in the plane, of the belly of that plane. So again, what is it we are doing as it pertains to agriculture here in St. Kitts and Nevis? Now, for farmers, see, the agricultural industry is a very intensive production industry. When it comes to labor and inputs, heavy. Almost all, if not all of what we require, except the human being, has to come from outside. When you speak of pesticides, you speak of seeds, and all the other inputs. If we are to combat any kind of disease that is affecting our crops, because if you affect our crops, you're affecting our food security and our food nutrition security as one. If our methods of controlling these things are delayed or stopped, again, production drops. Recently, currently, this is like gold right now. The amount of calls I get for egg. Everybody wants egg. Egg is scarce in St. Kitts right now and in Nevis, I imagine, right? Because we had a shortage of feed for a couple weeks. And that shortage in feed affected the food and nutrition for our birds, and so production dropped. Right? Some people, I spoke to a farmer 2 days ago, and he was getting feed, he used to get about 8 crates of eggs to 10 per day. He's getting 1 crate, right? It's not just that you get the feed today and he start producing the same amount as he was a month ago, waiting for feed for over 3 weeks. It takes time to build back the bodies and the nutrition and the immune system of those birds, because they have suffered long. And so, when I think about that very simple thing and how it has put this simple egg, a scarce commodity in St. Kitts and Nevis, it begs to wonder about other implications that are out there to come to us. And so, I want to say that there are a number of ways I've demonstrated to you that what is to come, it will come, and it will affect, again, like Naren says, how man sees himself in terms of his ability to provide not just financially, but the food and nutrition of his household. I have just a few measures that I think will lend into the bounce back aspect of things. I would suggest that we start stocking up. You know, you don't have to have a lot of money to this. Slowly stocking up on non-perishables over a period of time. Become more involved in the production of your own food. Because this thing about being self-reliant and protecting your household food stock is going to be a serious thing if the trends continue. All right? Advocate for lesser food import restrictions and commodity taxes at the national level as much as possible. I know we're in this room and you're saying, what can we do concerning that? I just recently saw something put out about 500 pounds of food can come to customs. So the government is putting out. My take on it might sound controversial, but I think during this time, when some persons have not worked for almost 2 years, I think you should remove it on food to get it in. I don't think there should be a limit. You bring in food, right? Added to that, I think as well, one of the things I discussed even with farmers, because I was told that the Agriculture Department and Ministry subsidize feed for farmers by a significant amount. And I sought to challenge that as well. I challenged the PS on it. Because I don't think it sends a good message. In fact, if you do a rudimentary calculation, a bag of feed when it's landed here in St. Kitts and Nevis is around 38.88 cents, $38.88, but it's sold at $40. So I'm contesting the notion that we're actually being subsidized. All right? But at the same time, if they are, it might not be by much. But I'm saying that for the loss and the damage that farmers sustain as a result of food in the livestock industry, that they be compensated. Now, the government has done one thing good. They have reduced the cost of feed to $25. But I believe that the time that it should be extended for should be longer. Because, again, production must go up and must be extended. We have to pursue special assistance packages announced by government. Now, a lot of persons in this area who are affected, I guess, have not applied. Some people for reasons, because one, the very farm themselves sometimes are intimidating. And I believe when we have church groups, young persons in the community, we should seek out some of these persons and help them to complete these farms and begin to try to advocate on their behalf as much as possible. I believe as well we have to start acquiring an indigenous taste. You see, you may not be able to do anything about the pandemic. You can't change as an individual and as a community the pandemic. What you can change is you and how you view and see your role as it relates to your own affairs. And changing your taste, developing a taste for local foods like how the doctor spoke about earlier, is something that is going to be serious and need to be seriously considered going forward. My last point, and I heard the moderator spoke of it earlier on, is about retooling and retraining. It's about a change in mindset. You know, a couple years ago, I used to hear students coming from Cuba say that you are a doctor, and sometimes you still have to go home and be a farmer. You still have to grow your food, and so on. But I could tell you as a farmer, and I could tell you because my coming back home to agriculture, in a sense, happened when I was still at University of West Indies, where a lecturer, she was a Rasta from Dominica, and she said to me one time, you know, our farmers don't eat the bananas we export because they see what goes into producing that banana. The level of insecticides, weedicides, and so on. And so when they see that they have that big patch over there, that big acreage of land of bananas, but they have a small one in the backyard that is separate. So I'm saying that we have to also start thinking about our own backyard and what we put in our backyard. last point before I end off was to consider for a moment, if things are getting kind of rough and hard, man, help a farmer on the land, work on weekends, and take home some produce with you. It might seem like a silly point, but it's a serious one, because growing up in these communities is something that we used to do when we go deep bay and help a man pull in his boat, and we get 5 fish to go home, and that served us well and our families. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alford. Of course, Mr. Alford would have touched on quite a number of things, and I believe that his presentation would have summed up basically what he would have stated. The whole idea for us to begin to rethink and retool as we map the way forward. Because, I mean, evidently we are in a pandemic, and he would have outlined a number of things as it relates to the agriculture. We are seeing food shortage, and if we do not begin to think the way we do things, definitely we are going to find ourselves in deeper and hotter waters. You know, I noted here as for discussion the need for backyard garden. I think that I don't know if government can begin to make it a priority, a policy, or whatever, but there is definitely a need for persons. You know, I mean, my grandmother in Curacao, she doesn't have much yard space, but whatever little yard space she has, she's always pushing something in the ground. And this, you know, she has so many different crops grown. Curacao was the first place I saw people planting certain crops in pots. You know, and I was saying to her, I'm so amazed, I couldn't believe it. And so we need to begin to teach our people the importance of growing your own food. He would have made mention of the self-image, of course, and the need, because men are considered as the breadwinner. And when that aspect is threatened, men need to develop their self-image, their self-esteem, and understand, of course, we are in dire times, we are in challenging times. And even though we face challenges, once my self-esteem is well boosted, once I believe that I can do so, you know what I mean? Because, I mean, for example, I work for government, I don't work for myself, but if for some reason things have to get hard, difficult, and I have to lose my job, or government has to let off, I mean, I always tell myself the only thing I could do is teach. And so I need to begin to understand the importance, as he would have indicated, of putting my fingers in the soil. I think I could outline quite a number of things that he has said, but I will now open the floor because of time for persons who may want to ask questions and who may want to at least commend the panelists, the presenters rather, on their presentation. The floor is now open.
Hello, good night. I want to thank you, men, for coming and sharing your experiences with us. And a lot of your presentations were very informative. And I'm pretty sure everyone here in this room, they learn a lot. And those who are listening online and they're following along, they were helped along. So I have several questions. And however, I'm just going to ask one of each, and hopefully you can assist me. Okay, I will start with the last presenter, Mr. Alford. Okay, so you talked about supply chains, and you talked about becoming self-sustainable. So my question is there a department for pest control? Because I have a garden and I don't get anything from it. Monkeys eat everything. So I want to know if there's any way that I can eliminate that, because mangoes I don't get, sourshops I don't get, papaya I don't get, guava I don't get, tomato I don't get, okra I don't get, everything, even potatoes, potato vines, they eat the potato vines, they eat the bananas. So I don't know if you can help me with that way, because I try to dabble in the farming, but it kind of demotivating if you work so hard, because you as a farmer, you know, farming is very labor intensive. And so you work so hard and you get nothing. And I tell you, it's very, it brings out a bad feeling in you when you wake up in the morning and you hear monkeys on your property. So I don't know if you can help me with that. Okay, Mr. Maynard, okay. So you said you wanted the men in here to speak about issues they have, and one of my issues that I have, and I think many men have, is one that has to do with your psychosocial support. Your psychosocial support. I think, well, I know that there is psychiatrists on the island. However, I think there should be more outreach to the men, because there are a lot of men who have issues they want to deal with. Because sometimes you need somebody to talk to, somebody, you know, to pour out whatever issues you have on your heart to. And so if, I don't know what you can do in that area to get some psychiatric support out to the community, I think that will be very beneficial. And Dr. Morton, you spoke about the health effects, the negative comorbidities of COVID. And one thing I know, because I was in Russia when it started, and I was there, and I'm going to be honest, I was a balloon. I was close to 300 pounds. So when I first saw the figures and I first saw those who are at risk of COVID, I just decided I have to lose all this weight. So I don't know, Dr. Morton, if you can impress more on the negative effect of obesity in relation to COVID, because remember, it's not just COVID that is affecting people, but it's the comorbidities that is really affecting people. And you know that obesity contributes to many of those other comorbidities, diabetes, hypertension, all those stuff. So I don't know what you can do in your, I don't know what you can do in, to get more people active and to just impress on people to lose weight and just to drop below, even to drop below obese to overweight. Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Francis, right? Francis, yes.
Yes.
You want to attempt?
Yes, I think his question was really, is there a pest control division or department that helps, I guess, backyard gardeners, farmers in general as relates to the challenges that they face? I know up until about at least a year ago, when I was more in touch with the department, that there was a unit, or at least some rangers that they had set up to go around to try to, in some way, cull the population of monkeys in some areas. And so I do think that there are some persons, I know there are two persons, one from Newton, one from Sandy Point, who does the shooting in this area here. What is normally required is for you to get in touch with the area field officer, right? There's an agricultural extension officer for the area. Don't ask me his name because I don't think I've ever seen him come to my farm, but normally that's the link that they will suggest to you to go through to advise them as to where you live and the kind of issues you have. Where you live, in particular, has about 1 or 2 colonies in the area. They're more along coming from the bay side, come up. And so I know of those monkeys, particularly the farm just at the back of you as well, in the Willard's yard. They are a hard one to deal with. But I think if you know the timing of them, especially because I have found that they are very predictable in their patterns and their movements, and I've used in the past time management. But if you're working somewhere for full, this is when I was working full time on my farm, I would have interrupted them on a day-to-day basis. I know they'll come at 3:33, so I am over there at 3:33, right? I use time management for that. But you will have to actually pursue the department and those guys because they have licensed persons, people with their firearms who will come and do that.
I could ask something. Is it possible for a normal citizen to get an approved gun license for the purpose of a gun license? A gun license for the purpose of pest control? And something else, I don't know, would a greenhouse help? Oh,
Yes, I wanted to add that as well. Based on the area you're working on, I would suggest using like a shade house or something in your area to assist with keeping off the monkeys if you don't have a pellet gun or any kind of gun to hand. I have attempted myself personally I have a gun, I have a shotgun, but it's at the police station and they refuse to give me, right? So I could imagine, and I have about 28 acres, right? So I'm still going through the process again of acquiring that license. You know? So to ask for something like that for individual who's just at a home level, I don't think you're gonna get at any time. I think even that they'll have some challenges with. You can do more than just go after monkeys with a pellet gun.
Yes, good night again. Mr. Francis, yeah, you did mention about psychosocial support. Very good question. I know, okay, I'm going to be really frank and honest with you as regards to that. We don't have a lot of people here in St. Kitts who are trained in that field. We don't have a whole lot of people that are trained in that field. To be quite frank with you, persons who are dealing with that field are overworked, they are burnt out. And COVID has contributed significantly to it. But I do agree with you that there needs to be more outreach. And the outreach need to be felt in the countryside, so to speak. Because I think a lot of the activities that they do is mostly based in the Basel area. But I do agree. So we need more psychosocial support. Men need it. And that is one of the reasons why I mentioned ego too, because men tend not to go to get assistance in this field, in psychosocial field. Men do break down, men do have mental issues, men do have depression. So we need to, that's why I say we need to put our ego aside and go and get the professional help that we need because of COVID-19 and it's impacted us. But I do agree we need to have these kind of support more based in the countryside, so to speak. I have access to the St. Kitts Mental Health Association so that I can bring that up to them. Yeah.
okay. With regards to the obesity, the statistics are actually pretty bad. Pretty early in the, I'm glad actually that that Mr. Francis was in Russia, because believe it or not, I think that the information of certain things, it's not really being shared in certain ways here as it is with other places that do their own research, because pretty early they identified that about 80% of the people that have adverse effects with regards to COVID are obese. So it was one of the big significant ones, and it was one of the things why people were saying you shouldn't lock down people because it's really hard to exercise when you're locked down in your house. And instead, you should try to find some kind of way to get people active and moving. But I don't know, for some strange reason, that got shut down. I guess they did pros and cons, and they made their decisions, and then everyone else followed suit. So the obesity is one of the significant factors. As was said, obesity also contributes, to all of those comorbidities. It has a direct correlation with diabetes and the control of diabetes if affected. It has a direct correlation to Heart disease, it has a direct correlation to high blood pressure. As in, as you put on weight, your likelihood of developing these comorbidities, it drastically increases. People that are not obese, they can become diabetic and hypertensive, but usually when you check those people, there is a really strong family history of some kind of metabolic syndrome or something, so it just made them a lot more susceptible than the average person. And that is not really the bulk of cases, because even if you have a family history, persons that just dedicate themselves to their health, a lot of them, they're well up in age and they never develop these ailments. In terms of what could be done, right now I think we could do a lot more in terms of the local awareness with regards to activity. Before COVID hit, wasn't related to COVID really, but it would become handy in this case. There was a fitness initiative that was started called SKN Moves, in which they were just trying to see how at least once a month on a regular basis that in the different communities that persons just have a reason to be active, if it's a walk or if it's something swim-based or something aerobics-based or biking around an area or a hike. They were trying that thing, but COVID interrupted it. I really think that it should be reinstated now that we have this knowledge to try to see how we could give people their best possible shot. Communities, but you don't need a government program to tell you to exercise. Communities can arrange that on their own. Groups of citizens, if St. Paul's has plenty athletes, and if it's one set of people that know how exercising goes, the athletes, they can organize and say that they're going to do some of the drilling routines and just invite the general public to participate in a version of it. It just has to be consistent. Usually what is recommended, I mean, when I recommend it to people, it sounds like too much, but what is recommended is for 5 days in the week to have at least 30 minutes of aerobic-based exercise. Every week, 5 days per week, at least 30 minutes. What is known is that when you aerobic, not lifting weights, aerobic as in running, walking, something that makes your heart beat increase. What has been known is that when you start doing aerobic exercise for the first 20 minutes, it's nearly like your body doesn't register it, if you have to think about it in terms of hormonal release. So by the time you've exercised or moved for half an hour, your body thinks you've only moved for like 5 to 10 minutes. So that's why we say at least 30 minutes, so it goes up from there. And the best thing would be 5 days a week, which is why I was saying the walking thing is a good idea, because normally when I see people walking, I normally see them walking from St. Paul's to Deep Bay, go on the beach a little bit and then walk back. That's definitely more than half an hour. And that is something that I see people doing. They aim to do it every day. So even when they fall short, you still get something. And over time, it is something that can help you to stay healthy. Even if at the end of the day, you don't seem like you lose that much actual weight, the level of activity is going to increase your collateral circulation, your body's efficiency with which they're using the nutrients, blood, oxygen transport efficiency is going to increase. So all these things, they will increase even if your goal was to see the waist get slimmer and you find like the waist barely moved. If you are actually moving, there are benefits that your body is going to feel. There was something else. You had mentioned something about alcohol?
Yeah, substance abuse, and is there a correlation between that and the COVID virus?
Okay, well, the thing with it is that I would have to go a little bit on anecdotal stuff because, okay, you could say that's a bit of a failure on our part because we really should do these statistics without being prompted when we notice a pattern. But based on the anecdotal evidence, to be honest, yes. Um, Even though it's St. Paul's that we're in, the most drastic place, for whatever reason, is Debe. Like right next door, like alcoholism, like everybody that was drinking before, it's gone way up, and those who didn't, they've started. And I pointed it out, but it's not getting at, I don't want to sound criminal, it's not getting attention, sorry. But apart from that area with that drastic increase, all of the areas we've seen, every weekend, it's like clockwork, X amount of people must come in with alcoholism, alcohol intoxication. There has been an increase in that. To blame it on COVID, I'm not sure, because the bad thing is that when I joined the system, it was 2019. I didn't get a long exposure. Well, when I joined the community health part, because I was in JNF before, I didn't get a long exposure to that to understand what's the normal. But to me, it seems like a large amount. And I have heard some of the nurses, they've worked there much longer than me. And I have heard them comment about the increases. So I know it is there, it's just that it needs to be correlated. The information has to be put together and presented.
Thank you very much. While persons are contemplating their questions, I just want to throw in two talking points. When the COVID started, when the pandemic started last year, yes, particularly, the discussion centered a lot around persons were quite resistant because of you were hearing stories of blood clot. Again, that has arisen. And additionally, when it started and then the whole idea of the vaccine came into being, persons were told that you have to take 2 shots. Now I'm hearing about a third booster. I just want to hear from you exactly what it is and so forth, for the benefit of everybody else.
Okay. With the first one, with the blood clots, it was a concern that came up with some places that got access to the vaccinations very early, specifically the AstraZeneca vaccination. They were noticing a pattern with regards to females of menstruating age. To me, it sounds possible with regards to the hormonal differences of that specific group. The rate, it wasn't astronomically high, but it was significant. It was slightly less than 1 in 50,000. So that's considered a lot in medicine. So that means that, for example, in St. Kitts, you're getting 2 injections, and that means that 2 persons minimum would be affected by this. But we didn't have information with regards to if black people are more susceptible, if certain other things make you more susceptible, etc. Because most countries, when they got the data, they just said, we're not going to use this specific one for this specific demographic. And they were saying this one is only for people of this older age group, etc., etc. With regards to that, that's why I would still tell people to ensure that you check first, make sure that you don't have any background clotting disorder that would make things worse. And for those that did, for some of them, we actually told them to just hold on a bit. There was a bit of pressure because of the employment and thing, hold on a bit. The Pfizer vaccination has not had a strong correlation with the blood clots as much as the AstraZeneca. For that one, the thing which was noticed was an increase in the likelihood of heart inflammation is the opposite. This one is in young males. So some places would then say, okay, so for young males, give them this one, and for menstruating females, give this other one. That was in the earlies, but in America, the CDC, they still cleared the vaccination for use in all young people below the age of 18, even though some people have the concerns. Their basis for it is that the likelihood of you getting the heart inflammation it is the like. I'm trying to remember. Sorry. Actually, no. The likelihood of you getting the heart inflammation, it's actually depending on the age group. It's actually a little bit. It's not a. I'm trying to. I'm trying to say this without getting into trouble. I'm trying not to panic anyone either. Um, the overall benefit of it, I think that's how I have to put it. The overall benefit of the vaccination, when they weighed everything, they made a decision that they would like to go forth with the vaccination of children, but still it's being contested because politically there is a will to vaccinate children, but some in the scientific community in the States are trying to tell them to not do that. And there is some back and forth. But politically, it was already agreed that they would go forth, but there is some fight back to that because some people don't think that's the way to go. For us, in our countries, they already made the decision to say they're still going to encourage the vaccination of persons in high school because, again, they think that the pros benefit outweigh the cons. So there is that. And there was something else you said? Okay, the thing with the booster is that when the vaccine, I mean, if anyone here has gotten their vaccine card, you would note that the vaccine card has like 6 spaces on it. That's because we weren't sure how many vaccines you would need. In the beginning, it was looking like 2, but for some things that we are vaccinated for already, it takes a while. Like for polio, it takes 6 vaccinations total that you get for polio for you to get an adequate level of resistance. And the truth is that the antibody, well, not really antibody level, but the antibody level and the level of memory cell activity, it actually decreases when you become an adult because you get all those when you're small. And people have even been saying you would benefit if you get a booster of the polio in your adult years. So for persons that would be like traveling overseas and they want to get their vaccination cards and stuff, sometimes you would encourage them to get a booster of this, get a booster of that. So for other things, we do that. For this one, nobody was really sure, but for safety, that's why the card had the 6 spots because the history showed that we don't know how many this would take. By the time we got vaccinations, some countries would have already had people that had 2 vaccinations for a while, and the reports, this would have been way back like May or so, reports were starting to come in of the antibody levels waning and different things waning, and people were already having discussions about a 3rd vaccination at that time. So when we started, we had the advantage of knowing this, and that's why the extra spaces are there, and all the other islands in this area did it in a similar way. We don't know how many it would take, and we don't, at this point in time, the government here has not mandated any booster shots. I think that's as much as I could say on that.
Thank you so much.
To me, it almost appears as if there was some level of deception as it pertains to that. But I think it's important for information to be shared. I mean, I think people should have known this in advance as well, but I don't know if research was forthcoming in terms of information coming on and channeling down. That's why it was done like that. But you saying that there's 6 slots.
I don't want to think that it is so much deception, you know. I don't think so, really. Because remember, this is relatively new. Remember, it is relatively new, and it's still in its trial stage. Okay.
Also, to the medical doctor, I think it was described as the distinguished district medical doctor. I've seen reports recently coming out of Europe. It seems to suggest that men are more affected by the COVID-19 in terms of getting sick or contracting the virus than women. And I think when they went into looking at the breakdown in terms of the demographics, looking at ethnicity, it also shows that I think black men were being more affected as well. in certain parts, right? Do you have any knowledge to that, and how does our information here reflects against that?
The issue with that is that in nearly all societies that you're going to find, because of all kinds of policies and restrictions and stuff they have, black people in general, they're at a lower economic status than the other people. It's only a few places where that doesn't happen. So because of that, your health, it's very easy for your health to be directly correlating with the amount of disposable income that you have. And if you are in a situation in which you're ill, or you're ill and don't know, you're not getting the regular checkups, you're not getting every single thing checked, you don't have certain things controlled, certain things like diabetes, they have all kinds of fancy things that can be used to assist with the regulation and the control, but those are very expensive, like ridiculously expensive. But then you have the cheaper things, which is what, for example, that's what we kind of use down here, and we just have to try to make it manage. But those things, they definitely, when you add it up, it adds up to the result of you having an overall worse income. Not being able to manage your ailments with the same level of technological prowess as other people in the country, not being able to check up as much, being forced to take certain jobs that either put you at risk more, or certain jobs that just like wear you down instead of making you healthy, wear you down. Sometimes it could be down to the community, air quality level, transport level, congestion within the home. You just have a lot more people per household, a lot more families per building, as opposed to people living in one house in the suburbs. You could just quarantine, and other people in a whole apartment complex, and the ventilation system, blah, blah, blah. So those things, when you add them up, those usually are the things responsible. But if you had to look at it on a global scale, the continent that has been least affected thus far has actually been Africa. It's mostly because they have a lower rate of urbanization. So that's one thing. There are other things, but I don't even know if I should mention them. But I'll mention what I could mention. They have lower rates of obesity. And like I said, obesity is directly correlated to that. There is a, yeah, I'm not allowed to push this at all, but I'm just going to explain that it's also coincidental that Africa has a lot of issues with parasites, and some of the medications that are used to treat the parasites, some people have said that those medications can assist in decreasing likelihood of COVID-19 infection. And they said that they see a direct correlation, and these medications are very cheap. So that's why people were saying in the beginning that you're noticing a pattern. This medication is super cheap, and it seems to have a good outcome with the COVID-19, but I don't have hard data to support this. I only have claims of people, and that's been the issue. Every time hard data is sought, the hard data, it's either the hard data says otherwise, or it's just not available. And the only people vouching it are people, again, just saying, I'm noticing a pattern of X, without it being scientifically tested. So that's something. But I could still sum it up with the urbanization, with the decreased obesity rates. That alone could overall have an impact.
Thank you so much. Do we have anyone from the audience who would like to ask a question or comment? Provide a comment or anything of that sort? Okay, Brother Ward? Oh, okay. I think something was mentioned of a number of businesses were unearthed because of the whole idea of the pandemic. Persons actually went into their business. Do we have any statistics to show as to how many new businesses would have been created or anything like that? You don't have anything? Okay, can we maybe speak to the whole idea of the level of domestic violence that were created in the home? I know when the pandemic, when we came out of our first lockdown, I was listening to a program, and I think it was the Lacodre, I think it was. The Lacodre, what's her first name? Michelle de Lacodre, who would have made Mrs. Blake, yes. She would have made mention that a number of, because men were in the home, you know, men are mobile, men are always up and down the place and so. And there were a lot of friction and tension and conflict in the home. And so after the first lockdown particularly, they recognized that there was a high rate of domestic violence in the home. Mr. Maynard, I don't know if you want to speak to that, if you know anything of that. And how involved was the department?
Realistically, I can't really speak to that because I am not in that department as it relates to domestic abuse. But initially, when we were faced with the pandemic, there was a slight increase of child abuse cases reported to the department. There was a slight increase of child abuse cases reported. But it was not necessarily coming from men specifically, but it was family members as well. So it wasn't really pointing out men specifically being responsible for these violence in the home, but it was families. And one of the reasons was that family, yeah, is man and woman, uncles, like, yeah. Yeah, but it wasn't men specifically, like, why I say that because it wasn't coming from men directly or men only. It was everybody, male and female as well. Lord, you make me forget my chain of thought.
Of course, maybe high level of frustration in the home.
Yeah, that would have contributed to that.
Persons being unable to move as they would have wanted to, and
yeah,
as a result, yeah.
Not only that, a lot of parents are not accustomed to having their children in their home all day with their children, so they don't know how to deal with it.
Yes.
Naturally, they don't know how to deal with it. Some parents are very quick to get rid of the children, so to speak. Go to school and come back. You only deal with them for a minimum amount of hours during the day when you get home from work, and that's it. They're not accustomed to it, so they don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
And their way of dealing with it is lashing out on their children. And that's how abuse can occur.
And the environmentalist, maybe you could speak on the need for backyard gardening. I know you would have made mention of that because of food shortage. I don't know if you want to speak to some extent on that. And then after that, we'll begin our closing remarks.
Well, I would have started my farming just in a similar fashion. I started using oil kits from Betty. When she done fry, she chips them, cut them out and fill them up with soil and plant my lettuce. And from there I started to go into tomatoes and sweet peppers and so on. I believe one of the things that people are affected by is that they don't have a history of touching the soil in that way, being that romantic or intimate with Mother Earth. But, and sometimes it has a little learning curve to some persons. But you start off with something simple. Like, as I said, lettuce is easy to come. If you kill lettuce or herbs, what you call green scallion or whatever you want to call it, if you kill herbs or lettuce, then you really should stop. They're hard to dead, right? So you start with those things because those will become the low-hanging fruits that you can really look to further spur you along and give you the encouragement. The reason why I use those stuff is because, I mean, the doctor is here. He could better advise you on the way you should eat per day. I normally try to eat a lot of my starch, especially complex starches, in the morning and do less of that in the evening. And so in the evening, when you're coming home, you can always go towards your little lettuce patch, get some protein to go with that, some fish or some chicken and so on. And that is the thing. I have had to change my own style of eating because of my own hardship, having lost my job a couple years ago. And that was for the reason that I would have come to that point. But because of my experience in backyard gardening, because of my experience in farming, I use and leverage those things to basically buffer myself and save myself a lot of money in that regard. So my encouragement really is to persons who wants to start something, to start very simple. Don't take on no big task. When we start, you can't control your garden, you end up give up, right? Again, when pests comes, if you have no experience of dealing with pests, and it could be some insects as well, it can overwhelm you. One of the most taxing plant I know of is tomato. It's like a baby, it's a child. You want everything, right? It's a heavy feeder, but also to eat a lot of insects and so on, attacks it and so on. So you have to know what you're dealing with. So you start off with a few in your garden, a few pots. I think there was some ratio that says about 6 plants or also per person in the household, you have to cover that person properly for a period of time. And so for me, that is the case. I think when I was thinking again of backyard gardening is you grow things that are easy and you need almost frequently. And you grow these things close to your kitchen door. There's something called permaculture where you grow in concentric circles or in zones. You grow these things closer to your step where you can see them, look after them, anything that happens in the seed, you could address it, and so on. So you don't have to have a lot of space for this, and so on. And for the more complex stuff, you just learn as you grow with it and so on. And if you can't do it, copy. Only in school, copy is wrong, right? Out here, you could copy. You understand? So you copy from another person as to what they're doing. You learn, you go and sit and ask the question. You ask who's been doing it, you know. And there are couple farmers well in the area who you could go and seriously learn from. Those are the labs. We have the labs, you know, and you just try those things in your backyard. Try the bucket, try the pots, try whatever you can. Try bags, try cocos bag, cut them off, take some from the bread shop, and then plant in them. You understand? So it's a matter of what you might like to seek out.
Thank you so very much. We're going to each of the persons to give their final remarks.
Okay. Okay. Okay, well, my final words would be few. It's just to encourage everyone to try their hardest to maintain a healthy lifestyle. If you know that you are having trouble being overweight or obese, now is the time to try to put in some serious effort to get it under control. Like I said, try to increase your activity level. Try to see if you can. The easiest thing is to go on walks in the morning. Just slowly start there, then you start to increase the lengths and times in which you're walking. When you get a little bit fitter, when you reach by like an end point, you could probably start to do some sit-ups or jumping jacks or something extra. And then just bit by bit, you'll find that the free way of exercising, it could actually be very beneficial with regards to fat loss and weight control. Also, try your hardest to see how you can control what is controllable with regards to your stress levels. It's very easy to say reduce stress, but it's actually something that's very difficult to do. It's about analyzing the problems that come before you and trying to sit down, fashion workable solutions, and then go from there. If you have comorbidities, get them checked out. If you're in a vulnerable risk group, get checked out. And if you are okay, you can get the vaccination. I would encourage that and try to limit the possibility of you contracting COVID-19 at this time.
Yes, again, kudos to the Wesleyan Men's Society for organizing this men talk. It is something that I would always encourage. Maybe in the not too distant future, you guys can organize something more, well, not so official, but where men from the community can just come in and sit around the table and just have an open discussion of that nature. But just to encourage men to educate themselves, and don't be afraid to seek help, don't be afraid to get support. Sometimes we just have to put down our egos.
All right. I think when I got the call from Mr. Morris to be a part of this exercise, I think I normally try not to get involved in superficial conversations as much as I can. I prefer to work and, assist where I can. But I thought instantly, one, the topic is strange. I was never thinking of men and how it impacts men going forward. But then as we begin to put some thinking to it, I realize it's a very important topic, one that we should have discussions ongoing. I also decided to, because I've always believed that in communities like these, we need to have serious dialogue, continuous dialogue, and I really do hope, and when I was on my way here, I was thinking, I really do hope that this is not the first, and this will not be the last of these kind of conversations. Doesn't matter what the topic. I think it challenges even myself and my colleagues here around the table to really put some thought to it. I think there is a really strong intellectual capacity in this community, one that is not really tapped into to its fullest extent. And I believe a lot of the challenges that we have in these parts can be solved if we are having these kind of discussions. I mean, I know the Word of God said, do not forsake the assembling of the saints. But I think we can also not forsake the assembling of our intellectuals in the community as well. We come together and we rap. And the church itself is a good facilitating force. It's one of the best ones, actually, to facilitate this kind of dialogue. But before I end, I just want to also encourage all persons to begin to take charge of at least some semblance of your food and security. I think you have had enough food for thought. Just imagine that the same tomato that you're depending on, or the food you're depending on, you don't know the nature, the state, how clean and healthy it is coming from abroad. And this is what you've been consuming at all times. And I'm encouraging persons to begin to invest themselves in this field and take charge in that regard. As the doctor advised, eat healthy. It's at the start of eating healthy is taking control of that part of your day-to-day life. All right? So thank you and good night to everyone.
I want to thank the gentlemen for, first of all, willingly consenting to be a part of this discussion. I think that we have had a meaningful exercise tonight. Brother Terry will make the link available for persons who would want to, again, look at it, of course. And, of course, environmentalist, Mr. Alford, we definitely would not let this be the last. We recognize that there are quite a number of knowledgeable persons in the community. This is a community that is on the rebound. This is a community that I believe and has a lot of young people in particular. And so it is important for us to begin to utilize the resources that we have in a meaningful way so that at least we can shape and fashion our young men and girls to be productive citizens in this society. Again, we want to thank you for agreeing to be a part of this discussion. We're going to invite at this time our treasurer, our secretary treasurer, Mr. Errol Richards, to make a presentation.
All right, pleasant good night to everyone. I just want to say on behalf of the Wesleyan men and our dear pastor, a great thank you to you young men who have taken the time to come on board and share with us such information that I think is very much needed at this point. And so, just by way of showing our appreciation, we just want to bless you with this little token. The real blessings is from the actual good Lord above. And I do pray his blessings and his protection on the three of you. God bless you. Mr. Minat. Oh, dear Doc. Thank you.
Again, thank you and have a restful night and a productive rest of the week. Thank you.